There's nothing wrong with her.
Hello.
I've got a technical hitch. There's no sound.
No sound.
Mhm.
I like to hear it.
Interesting, yeah. So's everybody else.
When you start saying technical hitch, that's the only thing I'm hearing.
Everybody else can. Hello, everyone. No sound from me either. I don't hear the sound.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Desislava Todorova. Apologies for the sound problem. Good news is you can always go to our website and watch the video, and there was some narration, so you basically got the idea of what was it for. Apologies for that. We're hoping that we're not gonna have any more issues. I would just ask everyone if you could mute yourself, please, before we can continue. Excellent. So thank you very much for joining us for our webinar. As I said, my name is Desislava, and I'm the project coordinator of the HUGE project. I am a researcher of environment, economy, and society at the Environmental Research Institute in Thurso, and we're part of North Highland College, which in itself is part of the University of Highlands and Islands, a partnership of 13 universities across the Highlands and Islands of Scotland. Very happy to welcome you to our webinar series. Today's webinar is about Scotland transitioning from oil and gas industry and the case for green hydrogen. For those of you who have been following our journey and our webinar series, welcome back. And to those of you who are new to our community, we are very happy to have you on board with us. I will give you just a quick overview of the project for the newcomers, and then we can proceed with our speakers and their thought-provoking presentations, followed by a Q&A, which is going to be moderated by my colleague Magnus Davison, and we're going to finish with the launch of our very own hotspot map. So there are exciting 2 hours ahead of us. So let's get started. Let's hope that the gods of the internet are going to be with us and we're not going to be having too many glitches or problems. I'm just going to share my presentation with you. Okay, that's good. I hope you can see that. Yeah, okay, excellent. So let me just get started. HUGE stands for Hydrogen Utilization and Green Energy. It is funded through the Northern Periphery and Arctic program, and it falls under Priority Axis 3, Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy. We have a total budget of 1.4 million, and the project consortium has 8 partners from 6 different countries across the Northern Periphery and Arctic area. We have 3 technical work packages that make up the huge output to service, which is called the hot service. And those are the techno-economic assessment tool, the T2, the hydrogen utilization and business model, for short, the hub model, and the the hydrogen training and knowledge transfer platform, or the HTT platform. All the 3 tools will be implemented in our case studies, which is going to be developed for each of our regions in order to prove their effectiveness and to exemplify how they work. You can learn more about all of our tools and case studies on our website, and all the information will be shared after the webinar. If I could please just ask people to mute themselves, because we do hear some noise interruption. Thank you. So next, I'll just tell you a little bit about the different case studies that we're having in our respective partner regions. We have a case study around hydrogen vessels in the Aran Islands, off the coast of Galway in Ireland. We are exploring the possibility of hydrogen truck network in Iceland. In Northern Ireland, we are looking at a hydrogen bus fleet, while in Scotland, we are looking into how to put hydrogen in public buildings across the Highlands and Islands, and more specifically the Highlands, working with the Highland Council. In Finland, we're looking into development of synthetic fuels through hydrogen. And in the Faroe Islands, we're looking for opportunity of developing maritime hydrogen and use of hydrogen in vessels near the shore. Before we go forward with this, so today's webinar, today's webinar. Oops, apologies. Today's webinar is a product of the HTT platform, which aims to increase the awareness of hydrogen as a viable option for a variety of end uses. In the public infrastructure domain, it be housing, transport, or industry. We hope that our webinar series increase the readiness to invest in hydrogen solutions by raising awareness of the benefits that can be delivered by employing a hydrogen economy. At the end of today's webinar, we will present you with an output from the T2, the hydrogen hotspot map. But before that, we have 3 excellent speakers that will give us an insight of what is happening in Scotland in terms of hydrogen development. Just before we start, I would like to share, I think everyone can use the chat, but if by for any reason you can't use the chat option, please go to sly.do and use this hash numbers 242138. We'll put that. Okay, I see Magnus has put it into the meeting chat. So if you can't access the chat, please go on there, post your questions, and my colleague will collect them, and then we'll moderate a session at the end of the 3 talks. So without further ado, I will just want to present you our first speaker, Dr. Nigel Holmes, who has an extensive experience in low carbon energy generation, supply and use. He has been a member of the Scottish Hydrogen and Fuel Cell Association since 2005, and he's been chief executive since April 2011. Over the past 10 years, the association membership has grown significantly and now includes over 160 members from industry, city and local authorities, universities and colleges, and development agencies. Nigel's presentation will be on scaling up hydrogen across Scotland. Welcome, Nigel. We're very happy to have you presenting at our webinar. The stage is yours. We'll just share your presentation.
And good morning, and thank you very much for including me in the program. So the slides I'm going to present are going to take us through some of the activities happening in Scotland. So Next slide, please. And it's very much about how the activities in Scotland are being shaped by some of the policy ambitions. So the key policy ambition is the target for being net zero by 2045. So the Scottish Government's target, which was set in May 2019. And as part of that, there's been a whole series of additional work carried out. And this culminated not last year, actually in December 2020, with the publication of the Scottish Hydrogen Policy Statement, with the very ambitious target for 5 gigawatts of low carbon hydrogen production by 2030 in Scotland. And the presentation is very much about some of the work that has started already and some of the foundations that have been put in place with projects across Scotland, projects about production of hydrogen, but also the demand for hydrogen, and how that all needs to come together if we're going to deliver not just the 2030 targets, but net zero. Next slide, please. So back to the start, this really kicked off in May 2019 with the publication of the report by the UK Committee on Climate Change, advising the UK and the Scottish governments that they needed to start to set net zero targets. And the advice for Scotland was for 2045, and for the UK as a whole was 2050. And the Scottish government accepted that, put that in place very quickly afterwards, and since then has been working towards that ambition of net zero by 2045. And there's also a series of interim targets. They're on the chart here, just on the left, starting, well, there was a 2020 target, which was for 56% greenhouse gas reduction. Didn't quite hit it. I think it's 52%, but still a massive reduction from the 1990 levels. But the next targets are going to be even more taxing. The 2030 target for a 75% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions is one of the most ambitious I know of. But it's also critical because to achieve the net zero target, we have to deliver the interim targets as well. Next slide, please. So the key thing is that this is not just an ambition without foundation. There is actually a lot of progress has been made already, particularly in the decarbonisation of electricity in Scotland. So the chart here, the graph shows the increase in renewable electricity in Scotland over the past 15, almost 20 years. And by 2020, Scotland was producing almost 100% of its annual electricity demand from renewables. And the bulk of that renewables generation capacity and the energy production is coming from onshore wind. So about 60% of onshore wind, about 10-11% of offshore. But going forward, we're going to see a change in that balance. Next slide, please. And this is going to be linked to the massive production of wind offshore as well as onshore. And again, in the hydrogen policy statement, it talks about the ambition for the 5 gigawatts of low carbon of hydrogen by 2030, linked to the target for the offshore wind by 2030, which was the 11 gigawatts of offshore wind. Since then, so last year in September, there's an additional target coming in, which is for up to 12 gigawatts, between 8 and 12 gigawatts of onshore wind capacity in Scotland by 2030. So onshore wind and offshore wind. And together, that creates a massive opportunity. Next slide, please. So what we have to remember, of course, is that hydrogen, apart from a very, very few unique occurrences, it's not there in nature as like a gas field to recover and to use. You have to make it from energy, and typically it's made from the conversion of fossil fuels into hydrogen, or use of renewable energy as renewable electricity or biogas into hydrogen, giving rise to the terms blue hydrogen and green hydrogen. But the big growth potential for Scotland is the green hydrogen from renewables, and in particular green hydrogen from offshore wind. And here you see some of the activities that are already in place and are moving towards the delivery of that 11 gigawatts by 2030 target, which is being supported by the Deep Wind Cluster. And we'll come back later on to talk about some of the other activities, in particular around the ScotWind and where that's taking us. Next slide, please. So that's the context. Yeah, we have the target for net zero. We have the interim targets for 2030, etc. So that's where we need to go. The question then is, what part can hydrogen play in delivering these targets, in terms of both the production of clean energy supplies, and also helping to start displacing fossil fuels. So all very well making the clean energy, but you need to find practical ways of displacing the use of fossil fuels in transport and in heat. So this is where some of the key learning is coming from early projects that are happening around Scotland. I'm just going to take 4 examples of what's happening. There are now many more, but just 4 examples to illustrate this. Next slide, please. So I'd like to start in Methil in Fife. This was actually one of the early locations for hydrogen project development in Scotland. Not the earliest, but one of the early ones. And what you see in the picture here is the location of the hydrogen office, which is just on the dockside in Methil. And this is where some of the early projects happened. So you've got the wind turbine, you've got solar panels, and around there's actually a number of buildings that were used as a test for some of the smart grid and the local production of green hydrogen and the use of hydrogen, for example, for displacing grid electricity. Next slide, please. But one of the other key activities that's been ongoing for many years in Methil has been outreach and education. And the hydrogen office, the team in the hydrogen office were very active in going out to doing workshops with local schools, with local colleges. And they estimate that since 2011, they've reached out to about 30,000 pupils and students in Fife region. Fantastic, setting the groundwork for basically an appreciation of how hydrogen can make a contribution towards the decarbonisation of the energy system. And I'll come back to that, but that is actually critical in some of the next steps in Methil. Next slide, please. And back in 2017, one of the successes at the Hydrogen Office was the Leave and Mouth Smart Energy System, supported by the Scottish Government's Local Energy Challenge Fund. This was about using energy from the wind turbine, from solar panels, producing hydrogen, being able to store that hydrogen in the hydrogen tanks. Seem to have lost the sides there, but I'm sure they'll come back. The hydrogen tanks provide you that buffer capacity. There's a fuel cell, so you could re-electrify that into the supply into the microgrid. So essentially private wire, so that it could run off the wind turbine solar when available, and then the fuel cell when that wasn't the option. And also using the hydrogen for transport. So there was a fleet of vehicles. There was 2 refuse trucks running on hydrogen diesel dual fuel, also transit vans, and Renault Kangoo fuel cell range extended electric vans. So very much a system approach, local energy system approach. But Methil is next going to be the hub for a really important trial. Next slide, please, which is about starting to use renewably produced hydrogen. In this case, it's actually produced from an offshore wind turbine. So you can, on the picture on the left, here you can see at the top left of the picture, the tiny wind turbine on the dockside. That's the one next to the Hydrogen Office. And on the right, a very much larger wind turbine. That's a 7 megawatts. It's actually a development Samsung turbine that was installed a few years ago, now being operated by the Offshore Renewable Energy Catapult. And that will be providing electricity to an electrolyzer that's being installed, storage tanks, and the hydrogen supply will go into a network, a new network of gas pipes supplying the houses that you actually see in the picture, bottom left of the picture. They'll be running additional gas network pipes along the streets, number of streets in Methil, and the householders will have the option of choosing whether they stick with the existing natural gas for heating and cooking in their houses, or they go to the use of 100% green hydrogen. So this is a real test, not just of the technology in terms of the production, distribution, and the use of the hydrogen in heating and cooking, but also a big test of, will the consumer be willing to make a change from natural gas to hydrogen, and in this case 100% green hydrogen. So this is the SGN H100 trial, currently being installed, should be operational next year, and then starting to produce some of this evidence. And the evidence will be critical in terms of, can this same approach then be rolled out on a much wider scale, not just on a few hundred houses, but thousands, or maybe very quickly moving up to city scale. And that will then be an important source of demand for hydrogen, and that will then again be key in the business case for actually starting to scale up hydrogen production across Scotland. Next slide, please. So hopefully in a couple of years' time, I'll be again sort of talking through the stages of progress and activity, and this slide will be very much about using the offshore wind for green hydrogen production and using that for decarbonising households, typical households, a mixture of shared use properties, semi-detached, detached properties, flats, a big range of houses actually being considered for this trial in Methil, an important key trial, not just for Scotland, but for the UK. Next slide, please. So, and in terms of the question that's just popped up, who pays for replacing the new boilers and cookers? Well, that is all covered as part of the trial. So the attraction is that the resident doesn't have to pay for the hardware. The hardware is being supplied as part of the trial. So 300 households part of this trial in Methil. So moving up the East Coast to Aberdeen. Aberdeen, traditionally known as the oil and gas capital of Europe, now the energy capital, and they're doing a lot to decarbonise the energy system. Next slide, please. The big success over the past few years in Aberdeen has been to build up the transport fleet. This picture was taken in 2019 when they had about 60 plus vehicles, single-decker buses, refuse collection vans, smaller vans, Renault Kangoos, cars, Toyota Mirai, the Hyundai, and using the locally produced hydrogen to decarbonise the fleet and to reduce emissions, improve air quality. Next slide, please. And this is built up, and this is the refueler down at Kitty Brewster. The initial refueler, which was supported by the Fuel Cells and Hydrogen Joint Undertaking, has been one of the most reliable refuelers in Europe. Very high availability, which is key because at the start that was the only refueler in Aberdeen. And supplying the bus fleet. So this was the core refueling station for the bus fleet, one of the bus depots. In fact, the service depot is just at the back of the refueler, the building just next to it. Next slide, please. And the project with the buses has built up. They've now brought in a fleet of new double-decker buses, so gone from the single-deckers to double-deckers. These are actually the Wright buses from Northern Ireland. I think there's now 25 of these in operation, regular operation. So, for example, the route going out to the west of Aberdeen, Colts, Peter Coulter, that is, if you travel on that route, the chances are it will be a hydrogen bus that you'll be using. And the feedback's been very positive, nice and quiet and comfortable. People prefer them to the diesel buses. And the price of the buses are coming down. The price of the hydrogen fuel, that needs a bit more work to get that to be truly cost competitive, but going in the right direction. Next slide, please. And recent announcement, late 21, was about the Aberdeen Hydrogen Hub. So that is really now starting to look to scale up. And BP, as a long-term employer in Aberdeen, picked 2 locations worldwide for this approach. One was Aberdeen, the other was Houston. Next slide, please. And also in Aberdeen, there's a lot of work going on around developing the green hydrogen test and demonstration facilities. This is part of the energy transition zone, so it's taking skills from the oil and gas sector and seeing how these can be used for the green hydrogen and renewables approach. So this is a project still underway, and if it's something of interest, please do get in touch with the energy transition zone. They are looking to shape the activities at the moment in terms of what this will be doing. Next slide, please. And I've mentioned the renewables in terms of the source of hydrogen. There is also blue hydrogen being considered. So just north of Aberdeen, St Fergus, is a project, the Acorn Hydrogen Project, the Acorn CCS project. You need both. You need hydrogen production, and you also need the carbon capture and storage if you're going to use natural gas for blue hydrogen production. So this is currently underway. It's on the UK government's reserve list in terms of projects to support. And potentially this could give us one of the ways of quickly scaling up the level of hydrogen production. So starting to get infrastructure, supply, and the corresponding demand in place. Next slide, please. So also very much looking at the hydrogen hub approach is Cromarty. Some fantastic work going on there. This is very much about building up local industry demand for green hydrogen, and also the production and potentially the import and export of green hydrogen. Next slide, please. So the activities in the Port of Cromarty Firth, it's starting to move from an area which used to make oil rigs to a support base for offshore wind supplies. So what you see here in the Firth is a floating offshore wind turbine. There's going to be a lot more of that coming through, and also around the area there's plenty of space for facilities such as green hydrogen production, other activities linked. And just up the coast in the Gordon, for example, there is the distillery, and not just one distillery, several distilleries, very interested in the use of hydrogen to actually decarbonize their processes. So it's not just governments that have targets for net zero. There's also a number of industry sectors which are starting to set the targets. So the whisky sector is one. The water utilities is another. Next slide, please. And the work at Port of Cromarty Firth also recognises that you need to have early supply of hydrogen to scale things up. Just realise I've just been told my battery is going low. Is it my battery or is it the other screen? My apologies. So import export of green hydrogen for Port of Cromarty Firth, and that could be key in an early scale up. Next slide, please. And here is just a snapshot of the activities going on around the area. So again, this comes back to the key message. If you're going to start scaling up production, you need to scale up the demand and the infrastructure to fit with that. So the hydrogen economy doesn't just happen by scaling up production. You need everything to happen to actually make it work. Next slide, please. And a good example of that is happening in Orkney. For the past 7 or 8 years, they've been developing hydrogen production, hydrogen demand as what is called either a hydrogen territory or a hydrogen valley, or in the current consultation with the draft hydrogen action plan, a hydrogen hub. Next slide, please. This was very much about starting to use some of the surplus renewables, renewable electricity, which was being constrained off the grid because the demand for electricity wasn't matching the supply, and using hydrogen to actually store some of that extra energy and move it around and use it in different applications. So the electrolyzers on Edy and then Chappensea, able to produce and supply green hydrogen into Kirkwall. Next slide, please, where the hydrogen can be used for a variety of applications, Some of it is being used in the blue box on the left. That's contains a fuel cell that can provide power to the ships when they're in harbour. The vans are hydrogen fuel cell range extended vans, but there's a lot more also starting to happen in Orkney. Next slide, please. And building on projects like Surf and Turf and Big Hit, there's been further projects around feasibility studies for decarbonising the Orkney distillery, conversion of ferry auxiliary power to hydrogen, a project to actually produce the first hydrogen fuel cell hydrogen ferry, the High Seas 3 project, and further project around decarbonisation of aviation. Next slide, please. So some of this is involving test flights of single engine planes, but going towards twin engine planes, such as the Britain Islander. Project Fresson is looking to have flight trials this year, and this was the same type of plane as it used on Orkney for some of the inter-island flights. Next slide, please. And the Kirkwall Airport is one of the areas that is seen as a sustainable aviation test hub. On the tarmac is actually a Britain Islander. It's not a fuel cell hydrogen version yet, but hopefully not too long before that actually happens. And the airport also has a project to have hydrogen genset producing electricity for the airport, allowing the airport to have heat and power from a very sustainable supply of green hydrogen produced locally in Orkney. Next slide, please. But where does it go next? And this is where we really start to look at scaling up. So next slide, please. Several projects are being developed across Scotland. One of these is the Flotta Hydrogen Hub. And the proposal here is using up to 2 gigawatts of offshore wind from one of the ScotWind lease sites to produce green hydrogen production. This could be in operation by the late 2020s. And the key thing here is Flotta is an existing facility. It's used for oil storage. So it's very much around starting to use some of the existing oil and gas assets for conversion to very large scale use of renewables for green hydrogen production, and then potentially that green hydrogen production for conversion into other products. Could be methanol, it could be ammonia, or it could be exported as hydrogen into adjacent markets. Next slide, please. But it's not just the Flotta Hydrogen Hub. You'll probably hear a bit later about the Orion project, so I'm not going to say much more about this, apart from similar approach, taking existing oil and gas assets and starting to see how these can be converted into future assets for sustainable energy production, storage, distribution, export. Next slide, please. And the opportunity was really underlined on Monday of this week when ScotWind made its announcement about the successful bidders. 17 projects have been successful, a total of 25 gigawatts of proposed offshore wind capacity. So compare that to what I was talking about at the start with the 11 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2030, massive increased potential. And if you actually look at the amount of seabed that is actually taken up by that 25 gigawatts, you can start to see how there is actually so much more potential around Scotland for additional offshore wind. So, the opportunity for Scotland is about becoming one of the major hubs of green energy production, but then not just decarbonising Scotland with a 2045 target, but starting to build up the potential for export of green energy in the same way as Scotland's exported oil and gas, becoming a major exporter of clean energy. Next slide, please. And this fits into the need for clean energy, not just in Scotland and the UK, but around Europe. So potentially very well located for that basis. There are clearly other countries looking to supply into Europe, Spain and Portugal with solar, Africa with solar, but the neighbour, the closeness of Scotland into some of these markets could be a key advantage. So that's a very quick canter through what's going on. Next slide, please. Just to wrap up, this is all looking very promising, but we have to remember that we still need to make sure that we build on the experience as we scale up. We can't go from 0 to hero in just one step. It's a very staged process. We need to have all of the people working on this, and if we do this right, we will deliver net zero, but we'll also deliver some massive benefits to Scotland, economic, employment, and many others as well. Thank you very much for listening. I hope that gives you a good start of a 10, and I'll join you in the panel discussion later on.
Thank you very much, Nigel. Thank you for the excellent presentation and setting the scene for what is happening in Scotland in terms of net zero ambitions and how do they tie with the green hydrogen ambitions we have, and finishing how this can all feed into the European hydrogen market. Thank you for providing us with all those interesting examples across Scotland and alluding to both the presentations that are to come in your examples. We'll see you at the panel session. And now I'll just present the next speaker, if I could just share my slides. Okay, here we go. So our next presenter is Mina Hanna. He has a background in petroleum engineering and renewable energy sources. He has over 4 years of combined experience spread across co-designing green economy, transition programs, improving energy efficiencies, alternative fuel operations, project management, and waste abandonment. Mina has recently taken up a position of managing the Port of Cromarty Firth powerhouse. He plays a key role in coordinating the working group members to lead the development of the new powerhouse research, development, and education facility. His presentation will be on the Cromarty Firth, an upcoming renewable energy hub. Welcome, Mina. We're very happy to have you with us. The floor is yours, and I will stop sharing my presentation.
Thank you very much, Daisy. Thanks, everyone, for joining us today. I'll start sharing my screen.
Yes, please.
Today, I will be speaking about the Cromarty Firth, the upcoming renewable energy hub in the Cromarty Firth, and I will speak briefly about the 3 projects which are currently being prioritized by Opportunity Cromarty Firth. A little bit of background information about the Cromarty Firth. So the Highland and the Cromarty Firth in particular has over a 50-year pipeline of multi-billion renewable energy projects on its doorstep. We believe we are in the right place at the right time. So there are 15 offshore wind development sites in close proximity to the Cromarty Firth area, and the winners of ScotWind bid for the 17 offshore wind development sites have been announced on Monday. A combined potential generation capacity of 25 gigawatt, which is well above the expected auction outcome of 10 gigawatt that has been initially predicted for the ScotWind. We have the right facilities and track record at the Cromarty Firth. Over £50 million have already invested in the Firth, and the Cromarty Firth has accommodated more wind farms and other projects than any other Scottish port. So we believe we are in the right location, and there is no other location better positioned to apply for this. There are a number of projects that has been prioritized by Opportunity Cromarty Firth. So Opportunity Cromarty Firth is a consortium of several partnerships of organizations. We have UHI, we have Global Energy Group, we have a number of other organizations, academic and industrial organizations, looking at the opportunity to have Port Cromarty Firth as a free trade zone, as a free port, which will attract inward investment and significant economic activities to the region. The major interlinked projects that are currently being prioritized at the Cromarty Firth area are the powerhouse, the R&D educational facility and skills development facility. We have the North of Scotland hydrogen program. We have the advanced manufacturing plant at the Nig Bay, and these are the main 3 projects I will be speaking about today. The aims of these projects is to stimulate significant economic activity in the region and in the UK, create employment opportunities and attract inward investment as well. And we're looking at export opportunities as well from these projects. The first project, which Nigel has spoken about briefly, is the North of Scotland hydrogen program. So this program, we aim to develop a state-of-the-art hub in the Cromarty Firth to produce, store and distribute green hydrogen at scale to the region. and other parts of the world. So we're looking at a 35 megawatt electrolyzer facility, and that's going to be onshore electrolyzer. The main electrolyzer is expected to be operational by 2024, early 2024. Currently, so the feasibility study for that project has been concluded, and currently we are in the selection concept phase. Mainly this electrolyzer, onshore electrolyzer, would provide green hydrogen, and we're solely speaking about green hydrogen, to the distilleries, the main distilleries around. So the main distilleries are Glenmorangie, White&Mackey, and we have the Diageo as well. The distilleries will have green hydrogen produced from the onshore electrolyzer to replace the fossil fuels they are used in their operations and facilities, in a bit to reduce their net zero carbon output and carbon footprint. So the production capacity of that electrolyzer is expected to be around 14 tons of green hydrogen per day. And that's a huge capacity. That's going to be one of the biggest electrolyzers, not in Scotland, but in the UK and in Europe. Hydrogen is expected to be used as well for local transport. So we're looking at something very similar to the Aberdeen buses, which are running on hydrogen. We're also looking for opportunities to provide hydrogen for heating for the local houses around in the nearby areas, and there are future plans to provide hydrogen for a spaceport, which is to be located at Thousandsland. The future plans is that we're going to connect this electrolyzer to offshore facilities, the offshore development site, the offshore wind development sites. And so this is a very good location for a number of different offshore development sites, which has been recently awarded by ScotWind. The surplus of hydrogen is expected to be exported to other countries, and specifically we have a very big interest from Germany, who's looking to export green hydrogen, the surplus green hydrogen produced from the electrolyzer. The second project I will be speaking about is the Powerhouse project. So the Powerhouse is a new applied research center dedicated to developing skills, R&D and innovation in floating offshore wind and green hydrogen technologies. The center will connect academia, industry and different stakeholders to inspire innovation and set priorities in a specific niche market, which is the floating offshore wind and green hydrogen. The other aspect of the center is developing the workforce needed for supporting the UK net zero transition. So we're looking at developing courses and delivering courses in partnership with other major training providers, as well as through the other colleges and universities, the academic universities we have. So we have in the working group member, we have a Powerhouse working group member, which have over 70 members representing more than 35 different academic, industrial organizations and third sector organizations, including training departments. So our aim is to develop a global center of excellence and position Scotland as a world leader in floating offshore wind and green hydrogen technologies. The Powerhouse is currently hosted by the University of Highlands and Islands North Highland College building at Turnhouse in Alness. That's the current location of the Powerhouse. The first joint research project has been secured for the Powerhouse, so we're currently working on a development of an ammonia fuel cell for different maritime applications. So we're speaking about providing shore-to-ship berthing of power, so we're providing maritime propulsion as well with the ammonia fuel cell that is currently being developed. This project is a joint project, so we have other partners working on this project. University of St Andrews, the leading partner for that project. We have Zem Fuel Systems, we have Low Emissions Resources Global, and we have the Port of Cromarty Firth to demonstrate the prototype of the ammonia fuel cell that is being produced. We're looking at early demonstration for the prototype this year for the ammonia fuel cell, so that we can see the feasibility of that system and to test that system in real life. Currently, we have MOUs underway with a major Asian university for research collaboration, knowledge exchange and skills development. And we have MOUs with major training providers. As I mentioned, we are providing GWO courses and hydrogen qualifications. So we're mainly speaking here about Survivix, AIS Survivix, and the OP2 as well. Several academic and industrial workshops have been conducted to identify the challenges and sector priorities in offshore wind and green hydrogen. And currently the working group is for free. So if your organization is looking to join the Powerhouse working group, please feel free to contact me on my email. I will leave my email in the chat. And you're welcome to join the Powerhouse working group anytime. That's for free. The next project, which is a very huge project that has been recently announced by the Prime Minister. So the First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, has announced in December 2021 that the Nigg offshore wind factory has been announced. So construction is due to start this year. Global Energy Group has agreed with the Spanish company Hyza Wind Group to build over 110 £1 million state-of-the-art offshore wind tubular rolling facility at the Port of Nigg. That's going to be the largest offshore wind tower manufacturing facility, a giant facility. You're speaking about over a 450 meter long, 30,000 meter squared factory capable of rolling steel plates to supply towers and other products as well to the growing offshore wind industry in the UK. And we're looking at exporting this as well to the other countries. The Nigg offshore wind factory is expected to employ over 400 people on a full-time basis. And the expected target capacity is around over 135 steel towers annually. This is a huge project, and we congratulate Global Energy Group for that one. This is expected to bring local employment opportunities and encourage the local economy in the region. So exciting times, I would say, for the Cromarty Firth area in the next couple of years. And we're looking to build a sustainable, highly built renewable energy hub at the Cromarty Firth. I'm very happy to answer any questions. If you have any questions, feel free to ask me. And I hope you enjoy. Thank you very much for your attention and for your time today. And I hope you enjoy the rest of the presentation as well. I'll be joining on the panel section for you. Thank you very much. I'll leave the floor now to Dizzy.
Thank you very much, Mina. That was a very thought-provoking presentation, giving an excellent overview of the developments around the Cromarty Firth and exemplifying the productive partnerships we have here in the north of Scotland, how well we work together and how well we work with international partners as well. I'm just going to mention again, if you're interested in joining the Powerhouse Working Group, please contact Mina. We'll provide details shortly after the webinar. It is for free. It is very interesting. It is very interesting development. So you're welcome on there. And you can see us and many other people that are working with us in the north of Scotland. I'll just a second to share my slides so that I can present the final speaker for today. Here we go. Our final speaker is Joe Naidoo. He's the Future Energy Project Manager within the Orion project. That is a partnership between Shetland Islands Council, Net Zero Technology Centre, Strathclyde University, and Highlands and Islands Enterprise. An ambition of Orion is to utilize Shetland's existing oil and gas infrastructure and skills, along with the formidable wind and tidal energy to produce green hydrogen. Excellently fitting into the title of our webinar today. They aim to provide a holistic solution that connects into opportunities in the northeast of Scotland, the UK, and Europe. But I will pass the floor on now to Joe to tell you more about it.
No, thank you, Desi. So if you just bear with me, I'll present my my slides. Yeah, so as Desi said, I suppose what the Orion project strategic framework rather than a project, it's a program of different Powerhouse University, Net Zero Technology Centre, HIE, and then also ourselves as the council for Shetland. So what we're trying to do is provide a holistic solution for the island. And that ensures that we get the most benefits and least costs for any developments happening around Shetland. And I suppose we've mentioned the team there, so I'm one of the project managers for the team, the Shetland Islands Council side of the team. That's led under an executive manager. There's 2 other project managers and a communications officer. So we're quite an expanded team from when it started. So it's 5 members from the Shetland Islands Council side, along with other officers, along with teams from Net Zero Technology Centre and the other project partners. So if I just move on. Yeah, so I suppose what are the benefits we're trying to get from this? We're trying to make the most out of what Shetland has to offer, and for those of you who know about Shetland, it's I suppose a relatively isolated location, but it does pack quite a punch for where it is. For instance, it's served the oil and gas industry for the past 50 years and has contributed roughly 45% of UK oil and 10% of UK gas. So I suppose Shetland has always been an energy hub of sorts for the past 50 years, and what we're trying to do now is ensure a just transition away from the current oil and gas industry and make the most out of future business opportunities such as hydrogen usage and export and production, but also the use of CO2 and storage, which is another opportunity we're looking at as well. In terms of wind, why produce hydrogen on Shetland, and what is the product that will be ultimately sold and exported from Shetland? I suppose the benefit we have in Shetland is high load factors, or the highest in the UK, of about 50 to 60%. And you'll see there on the bottom left, we've got the third largest wind farm in the UK being developed onshore, and it's going to be the most productive onshore wind farm when it's operational in 2024. We've also got other onshore wind opportunities being developed, which will put our onshore capacity to just under a gigawatt. So that's quite significant, and that's not counting in the potential for offshore wind that'll come into the picture as well. So we're certainly looking to be net exporters of products, whether that be electrons or particles produced in Shetland. And just to mention on offshore wind, we've probably seen in the recent result from the ScotWind round that NE1, or the block east of Shetland, didn't have any interested projects assigned to it, but we do have other interested developers who are looking to come on the back of later stages of offshore wind development, such as the INTOG round. So some of you might have seen Aker Wind, offshore wind, are interested in developing 10 gigawatts of offshore wind north of Shetland, and then we've got another company, Cerulean Wind. Their consortium are looking to develop 4 gigawatts to decarbonize the oil and gas industry, but also kick off large-scale industrial hydrogen production on Shetland. And again, we're looking at local use for the hydrogen, how the demand can be settled locally, but also how we can export it. So I suppose we've come up with some high-level figures in terms of hydrogen, and the local demand, I suppose this is a really high-level number, is roughly about a 200 megawatt wind farm could satisfy Shetland's hydrogen needs, and that's its onshore needs, but also for the offshore industry as well, and the marine industry. That's the biggest industry in Shetland. Sorry, I think someone's got their mic off.
Yeah.
Oh, there we go. Yeah, so we're looking at local demand and also the exporting opportunities, the opportunity as well. In terms of exporting opportunity, we were involved in a study last year looking into liquid organic hydrogen carriers in comparison to other carriers, and we were involved with that project along with ERM, Port of Cromarty Firth, and the Scottish Government, and that was comparing the different carriers and methods for exporting hydrogen at large scales from different locations. And I suppose in Shetland we have two opportunities. We've got the potential to export via tanker, but also we're connected via multiple pipelines to the mainland. So in terms of how gas blending technologies develop, we could be exporting via the pipeline as well. But I've mentioned that we've also got the CO2 opportunity, and we are connected via pipeline directly to St Fergus. So we do have the opportunity to import CO2, maybe use it to produce synthetic fuels and other products, but also store it in the multiple oil and gas fields that Shetland is connected to via pipelines. So we have fields east and west, and I think in a total of 30 operational and maybe 50 fields we're ultimately connected into via pipeline. So there's an opportunity there to help the mainland in the CCUS story, which may be associated to blue hydrogen as well. Yeah, and just to say as well, Nigel earlier mentioned blue and green hydrogen. There may be an opportunity for producing blue hydrogen in Shetland, but we're looking at that from two angles on its feasibility, and of course there seems to be less of an appetite for blue hydrogen at the moment. So I suppose our big opportunity is green hydrogen, but blue hydrogen could be in the mix because we do have gas throughput coming through Shetland. Whether we produce blue hydrogen on Shetland, export it to the mainland. To be produced for blue hydrogen to produce there, there's opportunities there, so we're exploring that angle as well. And looking at the hydrogen picture, I suppose I mentioned earlier what is the purpose of the Orion project? It's to produce a holistic solution that increases the benefits and decreases the costs. And I suppose in terms of decreasing costs, we're trying to ensure we have a balanced solution. There's mixed views on Shetland, for instance, with the development of one of the largest wind farms in the UK. We have natural beauty in Shetland, so whatever solutions are developed onshore and offshore need to be balanced. And of course, we're speaking to our colleagues in the fishing industry as well, and looking at how offshore wind can be developed and how Shetland can fully benefit from that, but also reduce the costs as much as possible for one of our biggest, for the biggest industry in Shetland, which is the fishing industry. And then also in terms of holistic solutions, we're trying to find the system, or the most beneficial system, that also makes the most out of byproducts. And if you can see there in the northeast of the hydrogen map, there's the Shetland Space Centre that's being developed here, and that'll require a significant amounts of oxygen, but also hydrogen. So we're looking at them as a potential customer. But also we've got an aquaculture industry here in Shetland that provides 25% of Scottish salmon. And they would also require significant amounts of oxygen as one of the byproducts from hydrogen, and we're hoping that these byproducts would improve the business case for a hydrogen business here in Shetland. And then finally, I suppose that the other byproduct is heat. What we're looking into, and locating electrolyzers where that heat can be potentially used. In Lerwick, we've got a district heating scheme that uses Danish technology. So I suppose we could use some of the waste heat from some of the processes to be reused in systems and future district heating schemes like that. But also hydrogen could be used as backup fuels for a lot of these processes on the island. And then one of the key benefits we have here is a capable supply chain that's been servicing the oil and gas industry and the marine industry for the past 50 years. And we do actually have hydrogen expertise that's been on Shetland for just under 20 years, and assisting in the development of hydrogen projects around the world. So that company is Pure Energy Centre, and they've done some key pieces of work for the Orion team in terms of developing our projects. But we do have hydrogen expertise that has been well established on Shetland for the past 50 years. We also have expertise relating to renewable energy. So we do have some wind farms on Shetland at the smaller scales, and they're looking to develop their businesses. And I suppose that's one of the challenges we face, is how do these small scale projects link into the larger scale interest that we clearly have in Shetland. I've mentioned Aker Wind, Cerulean Wind, looking at gigawatt scales. We've got one of the largest wind farms being developed by SSE, but we've got other big companies such as Statkraft who are looking to develop renewable energy projects in Shetland. So one of the key questions we have, and it's maybe an item for discussion later, is how do these small scale opportunities fit into the larger scale opportunities, and how do both ends of that benefit? How does the community benefit? How can we have community scale projects working alongside larger scale projects as well? So I suppose here you've seen a picture of this earlier on Nigel's presentation. This is one of the key opportunities we've identified, is the Sullom Voe oil terminal. You'll also see the Shetland gas plant that's operated by Total there to the top left of the map. But at the moment, EnQuest operates this major section here in the middle. That's been processes oil to be exported to the mainland. I suppose this is an example of what we're trying to avoid moving into the future. I suppose the situation we have now is Shetland does benefit significantly from the oil and gas industry in terms of the income but the council gets and other income streams that we get from the oil and gas industry, and the community benefit associated to that. But I suppose one of the ironies we have at the moment is we export significant amounts of oil and gas. I've mentioned there the figures of roughly 45% of UK oil and 10% of UK gas. We export those significant amounts only to have to import it again at a premium. So even though we're contributing a significant amount to UK energy, we do benefit one of the least from it, and we do suffer from the likes of fuel poverty and some of the highest fuel prices in the UK because obviously that product has to be exported, processed, and then imported again at a premium via tanker. So I suppose what we're trying to do is alleviate fuel poverty, which is part of the just transition piece, and alleviate fuel poverty by ensuring we're producing our own products and not having that situation where we're exporting and importing. We want to be clear that as well as the need to address the climate emergency, we also need to ensure we get the most benefit out of that. We have a product we can produce. Let's ensure that Shetland can have the most benefit from that, and that's from an island perspective, but also from a wider UK perspective as well. And yeah, just to be clear on the oil and gas industry, I suppose when it first started in the 1970s, we had a situation where multiple operators wanted to locate in multiple locations, and I suppose Sullom Voe is an example of what we'd like to achieve in the future, is a more centered and holistic approach where, for instance, here we have one industrial area that aggregates all the activity, oil and gas activity around Shetland to one location. I suppose that's one of the things we want to achieve through future energy opportunities as well. And we're looking at a just transition away from oil and gas. When oil and gas first came to Shetland in the 1970s, throughput was about 1 million barrels per day, and that's down to roughly hundreds of thousands of barrels per day. So oil and gas business is diminishing, and we need to find alternative businesses to complement that and replace it ultimately into the future. And I suppose oil and gas is diminishing slightly, approaching the 2030s and maybe even the 2050s. So as that diminishes, we need something to replace it, and we need to make sure we're making use of the skills that have been developed over the past 50 years, but also the infrastructure we have in place. So you'll see there the infrastructure on the site itself. We've got tanks there that can be used for storage. We have jetties there that could facilitate exports of products, but also servicing of other future industries such as offshore wind and carbon capture. So we are looking at that opportunity there. And we have some of the deepest water depths there next to those jetties, so that could be a benefit for servicing the future offshore wind industry. And just a final point on this one is we're keen to ensure we're making the most out of brownfield rather than greenfield opportunities. This is again the piece of trying to reduce the costs as much as possible for any development. So if we make full use of the brownfield opportunities, then there'll be less of a cost in terms of developing greenfield sites and some of the natural beauty we have here in Shetland. So again, we're looking for a balanced solution onshore and offshore. And that's just a picture of some of the connections we're trying to make, potentially centered around Sullom Voe, connecting into the oil and gas industry, the fishing industry, and aquaculture and the space industry as well. And there's just a picture of the system overall. You'll see some of the vessels operating around Shetland. And I think we've identified that the marine industry is going to be one of the biggest demands for future fuels in the future. And I'll speak about the Neptune projects later on, which is a project looking at the marine industry in Shetland and how that could satisfy demand for hydrogen, but also there's a potential to use battery technology there as well. And that's just our location there. So even though we're isolated, we're relatively connected to multiple locations. I suppose I've cheekily put there Norwegian power because we are located close to Norway. So there could be the potential in the future to benefit from Norwegian power if that opportunity presents itself, and maybe even Norwegian gas. So I've just put that there as I suppose a blue sky opportunity that we're considering. We're located close to up to 50 oil and gas facilities. They need to be decarbonised, but also we can repurpose oil and gas infrastructure in the service of future renewable energy, such as hydrogen. And we're connected via pipeline to St Fergus, so we can be connected into the projects there as well. And just an idea of the capacity in Shetland. So we've got 600 megawatt interconnector being developed, and it'll be ready by 2024 to connect us to the mainland grid for the first time. And as you can see from the Viking wind farm that's being built at the moment and other wind farms in development, we're going to be close to being at capacity and constrained again. So we're looking at the opportunity of alternative products for these wind developments onshore and offshore to develop future products that would address some of the challenges with constrained wind in Shetland. And I've mentioned wind, but we also have tidal capacity here in Shetland at just below a megawatt, and that's looking to hopefully expand in the future. So we have tidal energy operational in Shetland, and hopefully we can get that developed at larger scales moving into the future, and perhaps to the service of the hydrogen industry. This is just the high-level figure I've mentioned there of some of the local hydrogen demand we've identified, and it's relatively low compared to the I suppose the longer-term picture of what the capacity will ultimately be in Shetland. So I've mentioned a figure of 200 megawatts could satisfy local demand, but as I mentioned, we're looking at the high gigawatt scales into the future and industrial scales. So just to re-emphasize, we're definitely looking to be net exporters of products, and that's electrons and particles, whatever form that takes, whether it's synthetic fuels such as methanol, ammonia, and anything else that's in the energy mix in the future. This is just some of the carbon emissions we're looking to reduce, and associated to this, I'll mention one of the key pieces of work the council is doing at the moment, led by Ricardo. It's I suppose looking at the Bayes analysis of carbon emissions for different areas around Scotland, but I suppose we've identified that Shetland is a very different picture to other local authorities. For instance, the council operates 12 inter-island ferries. We have a marine industry that's not necessarily in the scope of the Bayes data that we're presented with at the moment. So we're trying to produce a net zero route map that addresses the scope of carbon emissions from Shetland properly. Now, just to give a list of some of the activities at the moment, so we've recently almost completed a techno-economic screening study, and what's that that's looking at all the opportunities I've spoken about so far, such as hydrogen production, carbon capture, and it's trying to phase all those opportunities and provide us with a short list of how we're going to develop these opportunities. So that was a piece of work led by Woodmac, VOA, and also Worley, just looking at the northeast opportunity, but also looking at the local Shetland opportunity in connection to that, to see what we should be addressing now, what we should be addressing in 5-10 years time, and trying to phase some of these opportunities, because there are many, but we need a short list of what we need to be chasing now, and have a proper phasing for these potential projects. As I've mentioned there, we were involved in an LOHC study along with Cromarty Firth and the Scottish Government. And then the Neptune project, I'll just briefly explain, is looking at the marine industry and trying to produce a map or a model and a tool to inform the transition for the marine industry. Which fuels apply for which applications, for instance, is one of the questions we're answering. Does a fishing vessel use the same fuel as a short-range inter-island ferry? So that's a project, and we've received £500,000 funding for that to look at what technologies make sense to where, and provide a model that could be expanded from the microcosm level of Shetland to maybe a more national picture of how the marine industry can transition ultimately. We've got a power study looking at the grid and how that can service future industry. So we're looking that's a study ongoing at the moment, looking at the grid now and looking at how it needs to be developed in the future to support future energy moving on in the future. And I've mentioned the net zero route map, and then we've also got funding from the islands growth deal. So we're working with colleagues in Orkney and the Western Isles to develop, I suppose, a net zero or an island centre for net zero to develop these opportunities from an island's perspective. So Shetland's received £5 million in that regard, looking at I suppose the community scale of some of these large scale opportunities that I've been looking at. So how do we satisfy hydrogen demand on Shetland? How is that technology developing, and what is how do we ensure that the community benefits from a future hydrogen industry in Shetland? And I've just listed there our partner Net Zero Technology Centre, who've received funding from the Energy Transition Fund, and they're looking to develop energy hubs, looking at technologies for decarbonising the oil and gas industry, but they're also looking at the hydrogen backbone and exporting opportunities. So we're linked to that and looking at opportunities there. Yeah, I suppose in summary, I suppose what are our key outcomes? It's to ensure we have the most benefits and least costs from any developments. I've mentioned that we're looking at the holistic solution. We've got massive developers such as Aker Wind, SSE, developing projects at large scale. How does the community fit into that? And I suppose we've got the same question we had 50 years ago when the oil and gas industry was being developed on Shetland. What is the holistic solution, and how do all the pieces fit together in the best way that increases the benefits and decreases the potential costs for some of these developments? And in terms of just transition, we're looking to address the fuel poverty issue in Shetland. I've mentioned there we actually import our fuel at a premium. Can we produce our own fuels and alleviate that problem to some extent? But we're also looking at the oil and gas industry and the skills that have been built up. Can we use those skills and reskill some of that expertise towards future industries? So I think that's I'll just finish off with this overall map, which you'll find on the website. So you'll see the different elements we're looking into. We're looking at hydrogen, and that's blue and green. We're looking at the opportunities around CO2 and also the byproducts of hydrogen production in Shetland. But we are linking ourselves to the northeast of Scotland and nationally as well. For instance, we're speaking to stakeholders in Germany and looking at exporting opportunities there in terms of the products we can be producing here in Shetland. So I suppose if anyone wants any further information, I'm happy to answer any questions afterwards. And I've put the email address there for the Future Energy inbox if anyone wants to connect with the Orion project. And I've also provided a link to the website there as well, orioncleanenergy.com, if anyone wants more information. And thank you for having me.
Excellent. Thank you, Joe. That was some excellent insights into the opportunities of transition from oil and gas to renewables and green hydrogen. It is great to hear how much is happening across Shetland. Increasing the benefit and decreasing the cost is something that we're very much interested in the huge project as well. And just transition from oil and gas by repurposing infrastructure, elevating fuel poverty and addressing the climate emergency is something we are all interested in. So thank you very much for this presentation and for closing this part of our webinar. It was an excellent finish. I hope the attendees got the feeling from all the presentations how we all try to work together across the north of Scotland for the better future and for greener opportunities. I saw my colleague Magnus's name popping on one of Joe's slides before that, and I can see some very interesting questions in the chat section. So I will invite Magnus to take over, and I will ask if the speakers can maybe put on their cameras, if that's okay.
Excellent. Many thanks, Desi, and many thanks to the speakers for fantastic presentations. It's been a busy week in energy in Scotland, and this has been a really nice way to not quite finish it off, but to pull in some more enthusiasm in this sphere. Very quickly first, before we get on to proper questions around the presentations, one question came in asking around the techno-economic assessment, the T tool for Huge, and I'm going to leave that one for Aaron towards the end. I think it was asking around environmental impact. But to begin with, in terms of some of the questions that we've had coming in, I've kind of pulled some of these fantastic questions out. I've maybe added some of my own questions onto the end of them, and I'll try and direct them to a speaker, but I would welcome other speakers to come in after that initial answer, just to add their own thoughts. And then we'll maybe round up towards the end with a question for you all. But I'm conscious of time, so we'll get started. On the first question, and you'll have to excuse me for kind of glancing to my left, it's on the screen, came from Ben Stewart, and it's starting with Nigel and asking around the price of green hydrogen that's been used in the methyl project. But I'll maybe widen that question out afterwards, or you could widen it out for yourself and then the other speakers afterwards, Nigel, asking about the cost of green hydrogen in Scotland today, how it compares to fossil fuels or electricity, renewable electricity, and how that might change in the future. So yeah, we'll start with that, Nigel, if that's okay. Thanks.
So starting with the methyl project, it's a bit like the question earlier about, what does the consumer pay to get a new hydrogen boiler or a new hydrogen cooker? So important to recognise that this is a funded project, and so the basis of that is that the householder should not be paying any more to be taking part in the project than they would do if they were just running their natural gas cooker or their natural gas central heating. So two parts to that is the project will be installing new hydrogen ready boilers in the houses that opt in to the trial, hydrogen ready cookers, and that will be at no cost to the consumer, because it's a trial. And the price of the hydrogen that will be supplied to the property, so the hydrogen will be metered in the same way as you'd meter natural gas, but the price of the hydrogen will be determined by the amount of energy that they used, and the cost per kilowatt hour will be pegged to be the same as the cost would have been with natural gas. So again, the whole idea of this trial is that the consumer won't actually get anything cheaper as a result of being in the trial, or they won't be paying any additional as a result of being in the trial. So for me, this trial is unique. As far as I know, this trial is unique in that it's the only trial where the consumer has a choice to opt in. There are other trials talking about doing 100% hydrogen, but they often are taking a whole area and saying, we're just going to turn all of the pipes in this area from being natural gas into either blended hydrogen, and that's happening down in the northeast of England. I can't remember the exact area. So everybody in that area basically gets what comes down the pipe. You're not really opting in. You could probably opt out and just say, I'm not using natural gas, or I'll just use my electric instead. But the methyl project is unique. And so for that reason, it's about as much about the consumer's willingness to make a change as it is about the testing of the technology. It will test the technology. You'll see how reliable are the cookers and the boilers. Do they perform in the same way as the consumer expects? So this will be all really useful, but it's the consumer's willingness to change. And it was during the actual development of the trial that they went out and they started to survey the householders, and they said, if we did this trial, would you consider making a change? And there was a sub question, which was if this was green hydrogen or if this was blue hydrogen. And the feedback, one of the interesting bits of feedback was that many households said, if we're going to make a change, if we're going to have this potential disruption, why would I change from using natural gas to using something that is made from natural gas? I would much rather make the change to something that was coming from renewable sort of sources. And I think maybe because the wind turbine's at the bottom of the street and they can see it, they can see how there's a local production of that. Maybe that helps as well. But the feedback was very much that the consumer is looking for this sustainable green hydrogen. And I think, don't get me wrong, blue hydrogen potentially has a part to play, rapid reduction of carbon emissions, but green hydrogen appears to be hitting a sweet spot, not just with the consumer, but also at the moment with investors.
Many thanks, Nigel. Very quickly, because I'm aware of the time, Ben's clarified in the comments section he was looking for the baseline cost of the hydrogen that's generated. Do you have a figure for that?
No.
No.
It's a simple answer. I'm not privy to commercial details. All I would say is that the cost of producing the green hydrogen on a kilowatt hour basis at the moment, even with the recent big prices increases in natural gas, is likely to be more than that of natural gas. So on a kilowatt hour basis, it's more. The challenge we've got is that if it was cheaper to make green hydrogen already, we wouldn't be even having a discussion. It would just be happening. Things would be changing by just commercial forces. The first thing you would see would be the industry people would be piling in saying, that's cheaper, I'll go for a bit of that, please. We still have got a way to go in terms of building up the scale of renewables production, bringing down the cost of renewables, because the cost of green hydrogen is almost totally defined by the cost of the energy input.
Excellent. Many thanks.
So I could add on. Magnus, sorry, I think that was a really interesting response, and you've mentioned there about what the investors are interested in, and I suppose that had led to the question in my mind: would customers be willing to pay more if, for instance, they could see that turbine outside their window and have everything more localized, and for it to be more of a community project? Would that be that would also be part of the investment rather than it necessarily being about reducing just reducing costs? And I suppose on the cost side, the comments I had there, and I was actually involved in an interesting call yesterday looking at how hydrogen costs would develop over time. And I suppose at the moment it's a lot to do with demand. There's relatively little demand for hydrogen at the moment, which leads to higher prices. And in terms of the demand we have currently, I suppose that's one of the priorities, is ensuring that the demand there is for hydrogen, whether it be fertilizer businesses or the oil and gas processing industry, should that be the first or the early hanging fruit to be decarbonised first. And I suppose what's the target for hydrogen pricing? I think there's two levels to this. Is first of all the hydrogen itself. How do you make green hydrogen have cost parity with grey hydrogen? So that's one end of it, but also another ambition is to have cost parity between green hydrogen and diesel. That's the ultimate goal. But I do think pricing isn't everything. It's that ambition of first of all decarbonising, but as Nigel has said, creating more, I suppose, more democracy within the energy systems and more control locally for that would be an interesting angle. And I suppose the other drivers for price, or the two other key drivers, I think, is going to be the regulatory frameworks and the market frameworks that control the pricing. There needs to be a cost, I suppose, the CO2 pricing, and how do we objectively form that CO2 price for the actual cost of not using technologies such as hydrogen, and how does that get factored? And I think that'll be an important aspect. But also, I think the technology itself will decrease the price. So you'd have the increased demand and the increased economies of scale, but also the increased capabilities of the technologies being developed. So I think looking at the recent action plan, there was, I think it was the electrolyzers are currently at around 55%. 55% efficiency, and then you link that to the renewable generation of efficiency, etc. But how do improvements in those technologies improve? Because for instance, I think fuel cell technology at the moment is approaching twice that's battery and fuel technology is almost twice as efficient as combustion technology. How does that factor in? Because that could ultimately decrease your demand for power in the first place if the efficiency at the end point is increased. So I think that's another interesting angle that I don't think has been explored so much at this stage. Definitely not through the action plan, but I think it'll be interesting how this develops. But there's multiple ways of looking at this.
Can I just come in on a couple of those points quickly? So one is about cost parity, and the other is about efficiency. So in terms of cost parity, when you're looking at the existing markets for energy, road fuels are heavily taxed so they're some of the most expensive ways of buying energy. Then you've got mid-range electricity, and the lowest cost energy typically in the UK is access to natural gas. And in terms of getting cost parity, if we can get hydrogen at around about £6 to £7 per kilo, that's actually on parity at the moment with taxed road diesel, road petrol costs. Now, in Shetland, you'll come back with a challenge and say, well, actually, the ships, the diesel they get is a lot cheaper because we're not paying road tax. So there's another discussion to have there. But in terms of general sort of price parity, the transport markets for road transport is the most lucrative in the initial stages. If you can get into power production, that's possible, but the most difficult is actually displacing natural gas. So either for consumer heating and cooking or for industry, that's the most challenging. So basically, if you can get it to work in heat markets, then almost everything else opens up and becomes really, really interesting. But the question of efficiency always comes up. It's to the point where people are talking about should there be a hydrogen hierarchy? Should you start to put hydrogen into certain applications? And I'm getting a bit weary of this one, because actually a lot of the discussions have been about making things happen quickly. And to be blunt, if you can get the price right, people won't even be talking about efficiency. They will be actually just working the business case or making a personal decision about what is the right thing to do. We never have discussions about, is a petrol engine more efficient than a diesel engine? Well, it might come out in terms of fuel efficiency, but it comes down to the cost of running something rather than the efficiency. The efficiency is something that's picked up. It's very much looked at in terms of a theoretical and academic exercise. It is important. I won't deny that, but let's not get sidetracked by discussions on efficiency. We're actually, what sways people's decisions is actually cost.
Yeah, thank you for that, Nigel. It's raised an important point here, and I think we shouldn't we should put emphasis on the price per unit for consumers here in the Highlands and Islands. 6 out of 7 of the local authorities in Scotland, well above the national average in terms of fuel poverty, are found here, and that's because we don't have access to the gas grid, and we have to heat our homes with electricity at around 5 times the price compared to per unit of gas, and we know what impact that has on the fuel poverty levels. So it's a point that I'm really keen to stress, and one that we need to figure out, I think, in terms of green hydrogen, so that we don't use it to exacerbate some of these social issues that we've got. But anyway, that's me having a wee rant. I'm going to move on to Mina and ask a question here around the Cromarty Firth.
Before the question, sorry, Magnus. Yeah. I definitely do agree that the legislations play an important part in driving the cost down of green hydrogen. In my opinion, if the UK moves towards the certificate of guarantee of origin for the hydrogen, I think that adoption would certainly encourage the developers to produce green hydrogen rather than using the blue hydrogen or grey hydrogen, because that certificate is going to have the carbon intensity, what the amount of carbon being used for the production of that hydrogen, and ultimately, so all the consumers have to pay a very high price for the cost of green hydrogen initially, but ultimately at the end we're going to have a stabilized prices. If we look at the energy bills at the current moment, the energy bills are expected to increase by almost 50% in few months. And why is that? It's because the fluctuating prices of gases, oil and gas, and the high prices is going on. We can't continue like that. We need initially to pay a higher price for green hydrogen, scaling up of green hydrogen to deliver down the cost of green hydrogen. And then ultimately, we're going to have a fixed price for the energy which we're paying for. So I think legislation plays an important part in driving down the cost of green hydrogen, and the certificate origin, the guarantee of origin for hydrogen is one of the ways which the UK could adopt to deliver down the cost of green hydrogen.
Mina, you've led yourself perfectly into a question which I was going to ask around aspiration in the Cromarty Firth area in terms of export of green hydrogen. And there's probably many who are asking here in respect to fluctuating natural gas prices and increasing in price for consumers, what the benefit of exporting green hydrogen is as opposed to dealing with, for example, energy security at home and decarbonising both heat and transport at a domestic level before exporting any excess green hydrogen. Can you talk us through what the benefit of that export at an earlier stage may be?
Well, to be honest, so in my point of view, we won't be exporting the green hydrogen unless there is a surplus for the local area. Within the local area, the green hydrogen is being produced. The first priority is to produce the green hydrogen and use it for heating or for local use within the region itself. And then the second priority would be transporting that hydrogen or exporting it not from Scotland to other parts of the UK, to England and to Wales. And that has been discussing with the powerhouse, the other working members. So we have the University of Nottingham. We had discussions with the professors there that they are currently in demand of green hydrogen. So why not establish a transport network between Scotland or Cromarty Firth up down into the England, and then we can use this locally. So the first priority would be the use of hydrogen within the local region, and then nationally down through England and Wales, and then the export would be of surplus that we don't need at the current moment.
Brilliant, many thanks. I've just seen, Nigel, that you've popped in the comments around export may be used to underpin a business case.
Yeah, so
I'm going to quick.
I don't want to sort of directly conflict with what Mina's said. You know, on one level, it would be great to see all of green hydrogen dropping into local markets, local applications, and delivering the local reduction of emissions. But on the other hand, again, I'll come back down to price and demand. I'm not an economist, by the way, but I think we need to keep a clear focus on the realities here. If there is somebody saying, I will buy all of the green hydrogen that you make for, let's say, €5 a kilo for the next 10 years, and you're building a project, that is exactly the kind of person you will say, yes, let's do a deal. I will supply you with green hydrogen for the next 10 years. And that basically underpins his project. He goes to the bank, he gets the money, project goes up, project is created, local jobs, activity, and probably other benefits for the local area. So although it would be, again, nice to have an approach that says we do everything here in Scotland first before we start to export any hydrogen elsewhere. Why should we use, if that approach gets in the way of actually getting things to happen, getting things to scale up, then I would say be very, very careful. Also, we may not want to actually just export green hydrogen. We may want to start to use green hydrogen production in Scotland at scale to produce derivatives. So we already spoken about things like methanol and ammonia. All of this potentially is a way of creating higher value products, creating opportunities to move the conversion of hydrogen into other products into areas like Orkney, Shetland, Highlands, Western Isles, you name it. And in that way, actually realizing the real potential, both in terms of renewable energy, but also jobs and capabilities within Scotland.
Brilliant. Many thanks, Nigel. Joe, you want to come in on this?
Yeah, again, interesting comments there. I suppose from a Shetland perspective, it's something we've thought about, and when we first started thinking about this, I suppose we had a nice graph where we'd satisfy local demand and then move on to exporting, but it doesn't quite work like that. And one of the issues we're finding with the Neptune project is, great. We've got this ambition of producing large scale hydrogen production in Shetland, and what's our largest demand? The marine industry, and that looks quite nice on a graph. We would have the immediate demand at the earlier stages and then export at later stages. But I think it's kind of started to look more like a jagged line, and there are other areas where the demand is going to be satisfied earlier than Scotland. So, for instance, we're speaking to stakeholders in Germany, and Germany have developed extensive infrastructure, and they seem to be a key customer who are going to have the demand at earlier stages than, say, Scotland and Shetland. So I suppose it's talking about the chicken and egg situation, and I suppose it's multiple chicken and eggs, and how's that phased. So in terms of Shetland, it could look like something where maybe we do start with supply, and our initial customers may be mostly outside of Shetland, on the mainland, or in Europe, and then that would enable the increased demand in Shetland. But then, of course, once we get to the larger industrial scales of renewable generation, then we'd move into the even larger scales of export. So it's not a clear picture in it. And in terms of the hydrogen product itself, I suppose it's a conversation we're starting to have with local developers or large scale developers that are generally interested. Is what's going to be the most valuable products? At the moment, it seems to be electrons. So we've got for instance, the Viking Energy wind farm, and that's looking to export the electrons to the mainland at the moment. That seems to be the main business at the moment, is produce electrons, provide to the local electricity grid, and then export the rest via the interconnector to the Scottish mainland. But I suppose the conversation to have now is that hydrogen's potentially will be a more lucrative product for any business. It will always be more expensive than the electrons you're selling off. So I suppose that's the conversation we're having. Is this could be a more lucrative products for businesses, but the only downside, obviously, is the demand. The demand's not necessarily there for that more lucrative product. And in terms of, I agree with Nigel. It's about pricing and how that develops, and how price and demand moves together. And it's largely, especially for green hydrogen, it's largely dependent on the price of the electricity. But I suppose it's looking at what's the best system you can put in place. Do you get electricity from the grid? Do you have private wire arrangements? Do you buy electricity at wholesale prices? And how much use do you make of constrained or stranded wind to affect the final price of the hydrogen product?
And just to build on Joe's comments, I think the other comment I would put in is that we spoke about, the ScotWind leasing round earlier, and I would say, well, actually, just look at the investors that are coming in. Where those investors are based. If they're putting a whole pile of money into a project, they will probably have a good idea of where that green hydrogen might be going, if indeed that's where the energy is being used. So again, this is very much an investor-driven market. The key point, and Joe, you make the point well. Electrons, if you can actually get access to the market, your electricity can give you a reasonable rate of return, but not all of the areas will have the 600 megawatt connector in place, or even access to spare connector capacity. And as well as talking about the onshore, the offshore wind, think about onshore with the new target for 8 to 12 gigawatts. Well, not target, it's out for consultation. 8 to 12 gigawatts of onshore wind. My understanding is that just about every single substation in an area that might be useful is already humming at capacity, because they've been taken. Now, this is where converting to other products and this whole idea of how you move the hydrogen around as different options is actually being explored at the moment by a project called Scot2Ger. It's Scotland to Germany. How you move hydrogen from Scotland to markets in Germany. And as Joe says, this is, or I can't remember who said it, this is one of the potential early markets. So people are looking at all sorts of different options in terms of how you take energy from remote locations, convert it, store it, transport it, and bring it to markets. And that's what the game is about.
Excellent. We're very close to being out of time, but please humour me with one more question and I'll go round. You've got Nicola Sturgeon and Boris Johnson to sit down and to agree on one demand, which is fairly reasonable in terms of progressing green hydrogen transition, or into green hydrogen transition from oil and gas. in one sentence, tell me what that policy measure you've argued for is. Anybody want to go first?
Honestly, are you actually going to get Boris and Nicola Sturgeon to agree on anything?
I said humour me here, Nigel.
So probably the areas that they will agree on, I think, if you looked at Boris's 10-point plan from whenever it was, point number 1, offshore wind, point number 2, hydrogen. I think you'll find that the Scottish Government has got a very, very similar opportunity 1, offshore wind, opportunity number 2, hydrogen. In fact, I see them not being as 1 and 2, but I see them as being 1 equals, because without the offshore wind, we won't be able to make multi-gigawatt scale hydrogen. And without the hydrogen, I don't think the offshore wind potential of Scotland will be realised. All of the areas that are a bit further out, where the connection by wire is going to be more difficult, I see this is where Scotland, the hydrogen actually allows you to deliver the ultimate potential of offshore wind for Scotland, and not just the early, easy to access stuff.
Perfect. Maybe slightly more than 1 sentence there, but it was a tough question. Mina, Joseph, I'll pass over to you. Any last thoughts here?
I suppose I've just have general thoughts associated to that. I suppose that there's this big push away from the oil and gas industry. And I'm wondering how that. I suppose the question is, the sentiment at the moment is, let's move away from oil and gas as fast as possible. And I suppose in my presentation I mentioned conversations and the current business, the current oil and gas business there at the moment, and to what extent is the oil? Well, at the moment we're seeing the oil and gas industry as the enemy, to progress in this area, but they're actually one of the key enablers in terms of the technologies they can provide, the infrastructure they have, but the skills they have. And for instance, you look at the offshore wind industry, who are the big bidders? It's the oil and gas industry who have the best expertise in offshore technologies. So I suppose that's one of the key things I'd want to target is okay, oil and gas seem to be the enemy, and we want to reduce developments as much as possible. But how are they also key enablers for these future developments? So that's a key question I'd like to be seen answered properly. And then in terms of another, I suppose, general comment is looking at the strategies in the likes of Germany and France, and you're looking at the billion euro investments in Germany and France, and then other strategies such as in Norway, and then you compare that to the strategies in the UK so far. So the £100 million allocated in Scotland and £240 million in the UK. Can we reach a stage where we have parity with the likes of Germany and France in terms of the way they're investing? I know they're investing heavily more on the demand side. And Germany, for instance, they're importing, are planning to import 50% of their hydrogen. So their focus is on the demand side. When do we get to a stage where we have the similar levels of investments from the UK and Scotland?
That would be your ask then, cost parity in terms of support, financial support. Mina, we're incredibly running over. I'll give you 30 seconds if that's okay, if you've got any last thoughts.
Yeah, sure. I would say to them, collaborate together on moving towards a diverse ways for net zero. So if we're looking at vehicles, electrification itself won't work alone. You need to look at the other alternatives, for example, fuel cells, ammonia fuel cells, hydrogen fuel cells. You have to look at diverse ways of reaching net zero. Not only one solution would work. I would say review the legislations, particularly hydrogen production, hydrogen storage and handling. Try to simplify the processes and the legislations. Yeah, so these are the only advice I would give to both of them humorously, if we had the chance to.
Excellent. It was not the easiest of questions. I'll hold my hands up and say that. just would like to thank you all for presentations and such fantastic and well thought out answers to these questions. I will apologise profusely to my colleague Aaron for eating into some of his time, and I hope he doesn't begrudge me for it, because I think those extra 5 minutes used are... Thank you. Over to Aaron.
Hi everyone. Thanks, Magnus. Thanks very much for taking the questions there. Thanks very much to Joe, Mina, and Nigel for some fascinating insights, fascinating presentations. It's been really interesting to listen in to you guys and even to see some of the questions that have come back so far. Looking at the time, as you say, we're kind of a little bit over, so I'll try and make this a wee bit of a whistle stop tour of one of the outputs of the project that we've been developing here. So I'll just pop up my screen here as well and let you see that. So my name's Aaron Kernan. I'm from Action Renewables in Belfast. We're one of the partners in the huge project. Also involved in the Seafuel project, which is another hydrogen project. So it's, this is an area that we see as a massive sort of, we've heard it talked about as the fuel for the future, but it feels to us that we're getting to that future now, and that's been the discussion for a long time. But we feel like it really is tangible, and we can see certain things that are starting to happen, as we've seen in the presentations previously. So within the huge project, we're responsible, I think, as Desi alluded to earlier on at the start in the introduction, for the techno-economic assessment tool, or the T tool as we've abbreviated it. And there's various applications we've included to make up that tool. Included in that are sort of an evaluation of the scale of projects being developed across Europe. So we looked at sort of different sizes, macro, meso, and micro-sized scales. We're looking at the transferability between different regions of different projects. We've developed a cash flow analytics tool that an organization can use to get it gives them an idea, a high-level idea of the understandings of costs involved with developing a hydrogen project, and maybe some ideas on how long it would take for a project to pay them back. We're also in the process of developing a tool to comparing the sort of the economic quality of different types of project and different aspects of projects. And then the tool that we're here to talk about today is another one that we've been developing, which is what we're calling our hydrogen hotspot map. So sort of looking right back at the start, where we're trying to work out, when we were creating the map, what it was that we wanted to show with this map. And to do this, we went right back to the start. So on this slide, you can see what is a schematic of one of the case studies that we're looking at as part of the project, which is based in the Faroe Islands. And on this slide here, you can see the full kind of hydrogen supply chain in relation to that project. So you can see that there's a renewable energy supplier, which is mainly wind, I think a little bit of solar as well. There's some grid transport to get the excess power generated there to a centralized electrolyzer facility. It's there for, it's then converted to hydrogen. Then once the hydrogen is converted, it's transported again down the line to the in this port, or in this case a port where it's used in hydrogen, or it'll be used in hydrogen fishing vehicles and for heating and that kind of thing. So what that kind of allowed us to do, when we set out to sort of create this map, we kind of decided to try and break this supply chain down into 3 key areas based on sort of review of various pieces of literature, looking at hydrogen strategies that are being developed, and using this as a sort of baseline for the map. So the first of the 3 areas we picked out was what we've called hydrogen production and supply. And production and supply obviously relates to the early part of the supply chain, where the renewable energy, your renewable energy is converted into hydrogen through electrolysis. So some organizations that might fall under this definition would likely include, renewable energy generators, the likes of wind farms, solar farms, but also the people who would be creating or building the infrastructure. So the electrolyzer manufacturers, potentially even the renewable energy manufacturers as well. So in this example, using the example here, the company or the part that fell under this would be the wind farm. And of course, whoever was producing or providing the electrolyzer. Then moving along the supply chain, the next area that we identified was the transport and storage. So Again, this obviously refers to companies or organizations that are involved in the movement of hydrogen from one location to another. So most commonly that would actually be from where the energy was produced to where it's going to be used. So again, in this example, it would be looking at compressing it and into bottles, putting it into a truck or lorry and transporting it from where it was produced down to the final place where it's going to be used, the final locations where it's going to be used. But other examples might be a pipeline, companies that are organizing or that arrange pipelines, install pipelines, and things like that. And then the final part of the supply chain that we identified was the utilization. And again, it's hopefully fairly self-explanatory. That refers to where the hydrogen gas is utilized. So likely would include things like filling stations, grid injection sites, heating grids, or infrastructure along those lines, and the likes of transport operators. So in this example, it would be the marine vehicles, the company that is producing or using the marine vehicles and running them and organizing all that. So once we'd identified those three key areas, we decided to produce an early version of the map and did a sweep around our various project partners to basically identify any organizations they could find within their regions that fitted under each of these headings. Once we'd done that, we collated all the information together and we fed it into some mapping software and sort of applied a key to it. So for example, we've got production and supplies represented by a green marker, transport and storage by red markers, purple represents utilization, and the yellow, which you can see is actually there's quite a lot of yellow. We'll cover that a little bit later in the presentation, but this allowed us, as I say, to put together an early draft of the map, and you could kind of see at that point some trends. Even at that point, as the map has gone on, we've added more and more. Over the course of the project, we've become more aware of different bits and pieces and added further bits of information to this, and the map's growing, and there's more information showing as we go along. As I say, whenever you look around the map, you can kind of start to pick out some trends maybe that allow you to see some ideas of things that are happening. So you can zoom in a little bit, and as you can see, just looking at this, there's a range of activity sort of across the central belt of Scotland. There's some activity in the northeast of Northern Ireland that stands out, and it's quite interesting just to see sort of at this point even some collections like that. Another thing that this helps us to identify by using the different colors, you can identify, as an example, where there may be either full supply chains or breaks in supply chains. So, for example, you may see that there is a cluster of hydrogen producers but no end use, which might signify that there needs to be some way of connecting those two areas up. So it's just quite interesting to see some of the trends that developed early on in the project. The next thing that you can do with the map is if you zoom in on the map, each of the different spots is clickable. So you can zoom in, go right in and see where something's located, click on it, and you can see some information. So for this example, it's one of the production and supply organizations identified. In this case, again, it's a wind farm in Northern Ireland. It just gives a brief introduction or a brief description and links to sort of the organization's website. You can go in and get further information. Equally, on this one, we can see in this slide, we can see a utilization company, which is First Bus in Aberdeen. Again, with a short description, and it just allows you to see some examples of what's happening, where things are clustered, and what exactly it is they're doing. As we kind of alluded to earlier, as I alluded to earlier on, there's a lot of yellow markers across the map, and at this point, it seemed to be the main thing that we could see when we were looking at the map was there was a lot of stuff to do with this particular color. So the yellow maps or the yellow markers refer to organizations carrying out research into hydrogen power and fuels. And at this point, we can see that this is by far the most prominent item on the map, which to me sort of shows that there's a massive amount of interest and research going on, but it's how we can take that to the next stage. So it's really important, I think, that we're able to see that that's what's happening and to see how much activity there is. And it also gives us a bit of confidence that there's a lot of interest, and we're focused on our particular project, but it's nice to see that there's other people out there trying to do similar things or different things, and it's really driving forward the work of the hydrogen, in the hydrogen sphere. And then just moving on, finally, this is really sort of the final slide at this point. The map is now live on the project website. You know, we can see and we are producing a report as we go along to sort of note how things have changed as time has gone on. But there's been a massive evolution from some of the early versions. Early on, you know, we could see there were a lot of sort of spots around places, but there didn't seem to be much connection. But now there's a lot more. You know, we can see more and more activity being added. But obviously, we're kind of constrained as a company and as a project where we're maybe aware of some of the things that are going on, but we don't have a wider knowledge. And that's where hopefully we can maybe key into some of the knowledge that's available in people that are here today. So what we've done, we've created a contact page on the website just below the map. The map's live on the website, and I'll pop the link up to it on the final slide. But it just means that any organization that wants to be included on the map can submit their own information, and that would be of great help to us. Obviously, it would help us to see maybe some information and get a bit more of an idea of what's happening. It would help the map be, you know, just evolve a bit further, and again, we can compare that then to maybe what was happening 6 months ago, a year ago, and hopefully show that things are growing and evolution is happening, and there's more and more interest in hydrogen. But it also can help potentially your organization if you're willing to put your details up there. It could potentially link you, you know, if, for example, there's a company out there that's got an idea of producing hydrogen, and they go on and they can see that there's organizations either nearby or within the same country that are maybe looking for someone to produce hydrogen for them to use. It might be a way to create that relationship. So there's a lot of benefits to this. You know, so we can say it shows us what there is, but it can also be used as a tool to help sort of bring people together. So we think it's a really good tool. It's informative. It'll be more informative the more information we get as we go along, and hopefully maybe some people can help us with that. We'll keep continuing ourselves to update it as we go along. And yeah, it's really interesting, and thanks to everyone for paying attention here today. My name, as I say, I'm Aaron Kernahan. That's my email address, and that's the link on the website here for anyone who wants to pop along and have a look at the map as it is. And as I say, the form's there. And thank you everyone for listening. That's been very interesting, or hopefully been of a bit of interest to people. And I hope that, you know, if there's anyone has any questions or anything along those lines, please feel free to fire them my way. But thank you very much.
Thank you, Aaron. Magnus, I think we have 2 more minutes for maybe some last questions. And Magnus, I don't know if you've managed to get them across from the chat for Aaron, and then I'll just finish off.
Yeah, I think that's maybe useful to quickly ask that question around the T tool and whether or not it includes environmental factors, Aaron.
Yes, I saw that question actually. That was from Ben, I think, wasn't it? It was environmental impact. At this particular point, no. The simple answer is no, we haven't included that. It's certainly something I suppose we could look at. And Ben, if you want to grab my email address and pop me a note across, or even get in touch via I think there's contact form on the website. Feel free, and if any suggestions, I'm more than happy to look at and discuss. But it isn't something we have looked at. We haven't looked at environmental impact. We've mainly focused on, I suppose, economics and the sort of the technologies and that kind of thing. So yeah, it's not something we've looked at this point.
It's maybe worth saying that as part of the HTT platform in the project, we'll be towards the very latter stages of the project developing some learning resources on the environmental impact of green hydrogen generation that comes out of our institute here, the Environmental Research Institute. So we'll make sure that you're made aware of that when it becomes available. Desi, I'm conscious that the questions were so good that they required a lot of time to answer, and I think we're just about out of time. So I'll maybe pass back to you to say your thanks.
Yeah, there is just Thank you, Magnus. There's just one last question. Will the map be updated? But I think this was answered in Aaron's presentation. We will update it at the end of the project lifetime for all the regions that are part of the huge project, but we very much welcome all the input from everyone else, and we'll put on everything on there. I just want to share the final slides of my presentation. Which is so first of all, I just want to thank our speakers, Nigel, Mina, and Joe, for their thought-provoking presentations, followed by the excellent Q&A session led by my colleague Magnus, and for the launch of our hotspot by my colleague Aaron. Please join me virtually in applauding them. Thank you very much for your time and for your input. I want to thank all the attendees as well for choosing our webinar series. We hope you find them useful, and we will provide speakers' presentation, additional information in due course on our website and via email for all those that have registered. And I just want to make note that if you're interested in engaging in more thought-provoking discussions, please join our Community Hydrogen Forum, where you can link with like-minded people and where you have experts that can lead the discussion. We'll share the information and the presentation after the webinar. We will be soon launching our entrepreneurs platform on the forum, so stay tuned for that. And if you want to learn more about green hydrogen in the NPA area, please follow us on social media. Thank you for joining us today, and I want to wish you all a lovely day, and hopefully I'll see you next time. Thanks to everyone.